The hottest places in hell are reserved for those who, in times of great moral crisis, maintain their neutrality. Imagine my complete mortification and embarrassment when I discovered earlier in 2021 that this famous Dante quote is a 20th century fabrication. Despite always checking alleged Buddha quotes against the website fakebuddhaquotes.com, which is a great website, by the way, I encourage you guys to check it out, I nevertheless took this one at its word and never thought to look up the actual chapter and verse citation. What makes it more than embarrassing is that I used this quote several times in the books formerly known as The Very First and The Very Next, which have now been published as How Kachin Became Sparky and Movements in the Symphony of 1939. I will have future videos discussing those books. As the guiding principle of Sini's father's life, a moral imperative, which compels him to bring people out of the lion's den into the safety of the U.S. before the Nazis devour them. He even has a framed calligraphic print of it in his office. And my character, Cinnamon, her father, Mr. Filliard, he was born in Russia, came to the U.S. with his mother in 1905 at the age of 12, and he works with the New Jersey Immigration Board, helping people to come to the U.S. And they come to later find out, he's been, kind of working behind his boss's backs to violate the xenophobic nativist quotas, so he can, bring all these people to safety and fill out dubious visas, or just find any excuse to keep them in the U.S. after a student visa expires, or just to get them to immigrate, period. I'll discuss a bit more about that when I make videos about these books. So anyway, so finally I got curious and Googled it, expecting to find a citation so I could see it in full context, because that's obviously very important when you're quoting anyone or anything. Nothing of the sort. Only multiple quote sites and a few other places trotting it out as a Dante quote. No chapter and verse at all, which is, kind of really suspicious if you're going to look up a quote and they can't even say where, which book of his or poem it's found in, or what would exact point in the book, or what line of a poem it would be in, because, that's something you really need to keep an eye out when you're vetting your sources and looking up, researching things. First of all, Dante considered betrayal the worst of all possible sins, not neutrality. The ninth circle of hell has 4 rings, each for a different type of betrayal. Caina, or Cana, which is for kinfolk named after Cain. Antenora, city or country. Ptolemaea, guests and host. And Judica, benefactor or master, which is named after Judas. Also, there's 0 fire down here. Instead, the sinners are punished by being frozen in an increasingly more brutal lake of ice. Neutrality isn't punished in hell at all. All 3 afterlives have rejected such people, and they're condemned to forever aimlessly run after a banner to nowhere and be constantly stung by wasps and horseflies in anti-inferno. The blood from the bites mixes with their tears and drips to their feet, where maggots collect in the pus, which is kind of a really nasty, gruesome image. These people took no sides in life, either for good or evil, just passively drifted whichever way the wind blew, only caring about their own self-interest. I mean, at least many of the other people Dante encounters in hell, particularly lower and lower down, they totally make no bones about the fact that they committed horrible sins. They don't, regret it all. They're still blaming other people or denying they did it, or, trying to excuse themselves. At least they came up with their own reasons for why they would, support evil or commit horrible acts. And these people in Ante-Inferno, they just, didn't even have that. They just, were so completely passive and didn't take any kind of moral stand in life at all. Dante is disgusted by them, condemning them as evil and cowardly, in comparison to how he feels pity, respect, sympathy, even love for many of the other souls he meets in hell. Over the centuries, many people have seized on this episode in Canto 3 as support for their various causes, although obviously this is not an exhaustive list, just giving a few examples out of many. So including abolition of slavery, ending nativist, xenophobic immigration quotas to the U.S. in the 1930s and 1940s, and also in the 1920s, and even through the 1950s and until 1965, when it was finally repealed. I very strongly believe this is one of the blackest, most embarrassing marks in American history, particularly because this happened right at a time when like fascism was on the rise, and it trapped all these like good people desperately trying to escape the lion's den in the occupied Europe and the Soviet Union, and also in eventually like say China and Japan. They were just completely trapped, and also there was like a near complete ban on Asian immigration as well, even before the quotas on people from Europe. So this is just like totally embarrassing. Although obviously that's a topic for another thing. But I do believe that was like a great sin to do these like racist, xenophobic quotas inspired by eugenics. So anyway, and also has been used as support for the U.S. ending their isolationism policy during early World War II, which I also believe was like a terrible like sin. We should not have stayed neutral nearly as long as we did, despite my pacifism. I do believe World War II was a morally necessary war. And another thing people have used that episode as support for their causes of the civil rights movement in the U.S. in the 50s and the 60s. By World War I, the fake quote had begun appearing with a slight difference from the modern version. In place of hottest, the words darkest, worst, and lowest variously appeared. The first known instance of the hottest version appearing in print was in 1944 in a book by Henry Powell Spring. I believe he was a liberal Protestant theologian, or just like a liberal like Protestant like philosopher in general. I'm sorry, I don't know too much information about him, just his name and the fact that quote appeared in that year in a book he wrote. From there, it gradually took on a life of its own, being quoted by politicians, activists, clergy, and lay people alike. Before long, it came to be believed as fact, despite not appearing in a single English translation of the Divine Comedy, nor any of Dante's other works, and can't even, be reasonably extrapolated from the original Italian as saying, oh, that's what it really meant. No, not even like the most like creative out there translation could, come up with that line for anything he ever wrote. Rather than doing a second edition of the book formerly known as the very first, and rewriting the pertinent parts of the book formerly known as the very next, I included a note about this in the front matter of the very next, concluding by saying Mr. Filliard will tell Cini in the third book, formerly known as the very last, that he was duped by a fake quote, and impressing upon her the importance of always vetting sources. And as I've mentioned on my blog, the reason I still call these books, even the two that have been unpublished so far, is their like original, like kind of unoriginal, like generic working titles. The very first, the very next, and the very last, and the fourth one in the prequel series by Atlantic City characters' working title is almost as an afterthought. The first 6 months of 1941 is because those were their titles for I believe over 25 years, since the early 90s when I first came up with them and started doing like the original rough draft. So I'm emotionally attached to those titles even after realizing they needed much stronger, better, more original titles for the actual publication. So while they were obviously published under much better titles, I will also always like emotionally think of them as the titles I first called them when I was like a preteen and in my very early teens. And if you're interested, I believe I mentioned this before, the new title for the book formerly known as The Very Last, which hopefully I will be getting back to the radical rewrite of within the year, maybe even next year. It's inspired by a line from one of Charlie Chaplin's talking pictures, and it's not the most obvious one. It's not from The Great Dictator. It's one of his I guess fairly lesser known talking pictures. So anyway, I'm look out for videos I will be doing on all three of these books anyway. In addition to fake quotes, there are also quotes taken out of context. This happens with many quotes from many sources, and I will be giving a few examples of a few others as well as after I'm done with the main portion of this video. And these fake quotes and decontextualized quotes are eaten up by people who care more about quick, easy sources of inspiration than checking the lines before and after. Particularly if a quote comes from a novel, play, or epic poem, you should look up the full context. Like, for example, is this the author speaking in his or her own voice, or a line of dialogue? Is it a standalone line, or in the middle of other lines, which might radically change your interpretation? And if it's a translation, is it literal, close to literal, rendered in a forced rhyme scheme, or presented with some creative touches to adhere to blank verse, iambic pentameter, or sound prettier? Because obviously, translation, obviously everyone, makes some choices in like probably no translation ever, even the greatest ever in the history of the world, can be 100% accurate. There will always be at least a few like liberties taken along the way because of choices of how to present, like, word order and make like the meaning or the image or the emotional impact come alive better. So that's obviously something you want to keep in mind when like doing or reading a translation and choosing a translation you want. It will never be 100% perfect. It's like, kind of madness if you're expecting or only wanting to read translations that are like 1,000,000% literal to the exact what the author actually intended in the first language. Take the quote, "Follow your own star." This is spoken by Brunetto Latini in Canto 15 of Inferno, in the middle of his mutually reverential conversation with Dante. Sure, many lines throughout the poem can apply just as well to all of humanity and readers' personal situations, but not this one. The full context, and this is I believe, the Mark Musa translation, but I mixed it up a little bit with the Hollander translation when I wrote it on the blog post I'm fleshing this video out from. And he to me, "If you follow your star, you cannot fail to reach a glorious port. If I saw clearly in the happy life, and if I had not died when I did, seeing that heaven so favors you, I would have given you comfort in your work." Given Dante's belief in astrology and how proud he was of being a Gemini, I'm inclined to believe a star refers to his sun sign. Indeed, Mark Musa translates it as constellation, thus a very specific context. It's not even a standalone line. And here are some other examples I wanted to give for this video, obviously not taking away from the main context, but I just thought they were kind of, illustrative of what I was talking about. So this is one quote from one of my top 5 favorite writers, Ivan Sergeyevich Turgenev. This is the line that many people frequently quote, just runs like, most people can't understand how anyone can blow their nose differently from them, or a man cannot understand how someone can blow his nose differently from him. And that's from his most famous novel. It's almost always like the title is given in English as Fathers and Sons, but the actual Russian title is Otyetsi I Dieti, which means fathers and children, although obviously the only like children who are main characters in the book are sons. But I mean, I'm kind of a pedantic nitpicker when it comes to Russian translation, so the real title of that book is really, Fathers and Children. And so the full line runs, "A man is capable of understanding anything, how the ether vibrates and what's going on in the sun, but how any other man can blow his nose differently from him, that he is incapable of understanding." So that kind of gives a more complete context to the quote. It's not just saying like, oh, people just have a hard time understanding how anyone else could like have different customs or beliefs than you. It's saying, oh, people are capable of understanding like really complex, advanced, like scientific concepts, like, astronomy, or, just general like mathematics, or just like really like difficult things to understand. But when it comes to, really more like simple and mundane things, like the style of blowing your nose, now that's like too hard or like weird to wrap your mind around. And then there's, the famous quote from FDR, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself." It's kind of like, I guess, one of the most like overquoted quotes of all time, and so many people don't even know about the full context. And by the way, FDR is no longer one of my heroes, although obviously it's hard to argue against the fact that he was one of the 3 greatest American presidents of all time. But because of so much has like come to light over the past few decades about what a disgusting anti-Semite he was, and just like not like such a good person, I really no longer admire him nearly as much as I used to. I much more admire Eleanor Roosevelt now. Now she was like a true hero, just like for a hero for women as well as for people in general, like much a better person than her husband, and she wasn't an anti-Semite at all. But so my views on FDR as a person have completely changed, but I still do believe he was absolutely one of our greatest presidents. So anyway, this was from the first paragraph of his first inaugural address in March of 1933. "I am certain that my fellow Americans expect that on my induction into the presidency, I will address them with a candor and a decision which the present situation of our people impel. This is preeminently the time to speak the truth, the whole truth, frankly and boldly, nor need we shrink from honestly facing conditions in our country today. This great nation will endure, as it has endured, will revive and will prosper. So, first of all, Let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror, which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance. In every dark hour of our national life, a leadership of frankness and vigor has met with that understanding and support of the people themselves, which is essential to victory. I am convinced that you will again give that support to leadership in these critical days. So that just gives a fuller, complete context to this famous quote. He's not just saying, "Oh, we should only be afraid of fear." No, he's giving specific examples of why we shouldn't, why we should be afraid of fear, and like how we can project that into doing greater things. It's, makes it a more like complex subject he's talking about, not just like, oh, quick, easy, cutesy little like inspiration. And there's another famous quote which many people like engrave on their wedding rings and get like tattoos of without knowing the first thing about the history of this quote or even the poem it comes from. The quote by Virgil. It's Many people believe there a line from Virgil is "Amor vincit omnia," meaning love conquers all, but it was truly written as "Omnia vincit amor, et nos cedimus amore." Love conquers all. Let us, too, yield to love, which comes from the 10th book of his Eclogues, and it's spoken by Gallus, a lovesick man who's dying of a broken heart and driven mad by love after his lover left him, and even the gods are unable to save him. And the quote has been, popularly changed in the imagination from what Virgil originally wrote to "Amor vincit omnia," because the painter Caravaggio did an early 17th century painting of the Roman god Amor in the form of Cupid, and it was titled "Amor vincit omnia." The Latin word order is very free. Putting the word amor first would violate dactylic hexameter, which was the style Virgil and most other Latin poets wrote in. And so, obviously it completely, changes the context of this quote if you realize what actually is happening when this person is speaking it. He's not, just saying it as a grand, like romantic gesture. No, he's saying it because he's, dying of love and just nobody can save him. So, just do some more vetting of your sources when you're looking up quotes. I know it's like easy and like kind of lazy to just, oh, this was on a quote site or in a book of quotes, and I'll use that, on my blog or like write that in my yearbook quote or something. But no, you should actually look up the full context of how these lines are being said, because you might not even like that quote anymore. Like, for example, it comes in like the middle of a religious sermon, and you don't like believe those like sentiments, or just someone is saying something really horrible like before and after. Another quote that is famously misused is George Santayana. Those who like don't remember history are condemned to repeat it, or those who don't learn from history are condemned to repeat it. He's actually talking about historical cycles repeating, not necessarily, oh, if we don't learn from horrible things in the past, they're going to happen again. So obviously you need to do better research when you're looking up quotes. I mean, it might seem like, oh, it's not really a big deal, nobody really cares about this, but because, when people pass these things along, it's harder to debunk, as I'm explained in the last paragraph of this blog post. People who pass along fake quotes, misquotes, and quotes out of context aren't deliberately ignorant. In fact, many times they're very well-meaning and had no reason to doubt the source they found that line in. But just like with urban myths, these quotes become that much harder to debunk when they're constantly trotted out as factual. I mean, it's just, it's not really that hard to do a little extra research and look into these quotes, particularly if you see the book they come from or the author. You can like look through it and find it out. You don't want to like pass along false information, because then it's so much harder for people to like disbelieve it the next time it comes around, and they'll like pass it around to more and more people, like with these like stupid urban legends, particularly like urban legend names like Lee Dasha, where the dash is supposed to be silent, or the twins Lamangelo or Orangelo, who apparently live in every single town in the English-speaking world in every single generation, just like really stupid nonsense like that. Thank you very much for watching. Please consider liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing. My next blog will probably be on Monday. I'm not sure what the subject will be about yet, but thank you very much for watching, and I really do appreciate all the support as my channel grows, and for being patient with me during my very long learning curve with becoming more adept at doing like technological things like, camera angles and lighting, video editing, and things like that. So I am looking very much forward to growing my channel during this year, and hopefully I will get to 100 subscribers by the end of the year. Thank you for watching. Bye.